Late August 1944, 0615 hours. Observation Post 4, Pardelhan, France. The morning report lay crumpled on the desk. Its mathematics an insult to German engineering. Technical officers at Flak Regiment 155W stared at the figures, struggling to comprehend what they meant. The interception rate for their V-1 flying bombs, their new vengeance weapon, had inexplicably climbed to 82%. This single number was not just a failure, it was an impossibility. It violated every principle of ballistic probability taught at Luftwaffe technical academies across the Reich. Their calculations were clear. The chance of a direct hit on such a small, fast target was less than 1 in 10,000. Yet, through field telescopes, German observers had witnessed something else. They watched their V-1s, flying perfectly toward London, suddenly vaporize. They weren't being struck directly. The Allied anti-aircraft shells were exploding around the missiles, detonating with an impossible, otherworldly accuracy, turning near misses into kills. This contradicted everything their intelligence services had assured them about Allied capabilities. Something was happening over the coastal gun belt that German physics said shouldn't exist. To understand their confusion, we must go back 10 weeks. The date is June 13, 1944, exactly 1 week after Allied boots hit the beaches in Normandy. In response to the invasion, Hitler unleashes his long-promised Vergeltungswaffe, his vengeance weapon, against London. At 4:25 in the morning, the city's air raid sirens are joined by a new, terrifying sound, a low, stuttering roar, like a motorbike engine in the sky. Then, silence. The first V-1 flying bomb falls on Grove Road in Bow, destroying a railway bridge and the surrounding homes. 6 people are killed, 30 injured, and 200 are made homeless in an instant. This was not a simple bomb. It was the world's first operational cruise missile, a pilotless aircraft powered by an Argus pulse jet engine carrying 850 kilograms of high explosive at a blistering 640 kilometers per hour. It was a terror weapon, designed to be unstoppable, and the German High Command believed it would finally bring Britain to its knees. This confidence wasn't arrogance, it was based on cold, hard mathematics. The German High Command knew the V-1 was unstoppable because their best scientists had proven it. Dr. Robert Lasser, who designed the missile's control system, had calculated that Allied interception was nearly impossible. The flying bomb traveled at 640 kilometers per hour at varying altitudes. This was too fast for many Allied fighters, which needed to push past 650 kilometers per hour just to intercept, forcing them to close within 200 meters and risk being destroyed by the massive explosion. But the real impossibility lay with anti-aircraft fire. The probability of a conventional shell scoring a direct hit on such a small, fast target was calculated at less than 1 in 10,000 shells fired. This wasn't propaganda. It was sound ballistic science. Conventional timed fuses required gunners to predict the target's exact altitude and speed, manually set the fuse, and fire, hoping the shell and the missile would occupy the same tiny patch of sky at the exact same second. With the V-1 speed, gunners had perhaps 30 seconds from detection to engagement. The weapon would be past them before they could ever hope to land a lucky 1 in 10,000 shot. The man in charge of this new aerial assault was Oberst Max Wachtel, commander of Flak Regiment 155W, and the entire V-1 offensive. His confidence, shared by planners like Major Walter Dornberger at the Peenemünde Army Research Center, was rooted in a devastating strategic calculation. They had calculated that even with a conservative 25% success rate, the V-1s would deliver more explosive power to London than the entire Blitz of 1940 to 41. Each missile cost only a fraction of a manned bomber mission to produce, approximately 5,000 Reichsmarks, and it came with the ultimate advantage: zero risk to their irreplaceable aircrews. From Vogtel's perspective, this wasn't just a new weapon, it was a war-winning equation. What neither Oberst Vogtel nor any German scientist knew was that they were witnessing the deployment of one of World War II's most closely guarded secrets. This was the solution to their unbeatable weapon. It was called the Proximity Fuze. The Allies had coded it VT for variable time, a name deliberately misleading to suggest it was just an improved conventional timed fuse, not a radical proximity sensor. This technology was considered so revolutionary, so war-winning, that it was protected at the exact same security level as the Manhattan Project and the atomic bomb. It was, in effect, a thinking shell. It didn't need a direct 1 in 10,000 hit. It contained a miniature radio transmitter that sensed when it was near a target. When it detected proximity, it automatically detonated, shredding the V1 with steel fragments. The Germans were firing a bullet, the Allies were firing a tiny, self-guided missile. This impossible technology now faced its first true test, creating a road of trials for the baffled German command. As the V1 campaign began, the proportion of flying bombs destroyed by the coastal gunbelt was 17% in June. Within days, troubling reports began to reach German intelligence. By late June, the interception rate climbed to 24%. This was higher than predicted, but Vogtel's staff could still rationalize it. Perhaps the British were simply getting better at their calculations or concentrating their fire. Then came July, and the statistics became inexplicable. The numbers no longer made sense. German technical officers monitoring the V1's effectiveness noticed British guns were claiming kills with impossibly low ammunition expenditure. More chilling were the eyewitness accounts. Observers on the French coast, watching the missiles fly steadily toward England, suddenly saw them enveloped in flak bursts. The V1s would then tumble from the sky, despite the explosions clearly occurring too far away for a direct hit. The Germans were witnessing their unbeatable weapon being defeated by a ghost. The Allies didn't just deploy a secret weapon, they built an entire, integrated system around it. The British, under the command of General Frederick Pyle, completely reorganized their anti-aircraft defenses. In a brilliant and rapid strategic move, they redeployed their guns from their positions in the North Downs to the South Coast, creating a dense, concentrated coastal gunbelt. This reorganization was a masterstroke for two critical reasons. First, it meant the V1s, flying their predictable paths from France, would hit this wall of flak the instant they crossed the English coast, giving the gunners their first and best chance to engage. But the second reason was even more crucial: secrecy. By positioning the guns on the coast and firing out over the water, any dud shells, any of the precious, top-secret proximity fuses that failed to explode, would fall harmlessly into the English Channel. Naval vessels then patrolled the waters, ensuring that German recovery teams could never get their hands on an unexploded fuse and reverse-engineer the impossible technology that was systematically dismantling their offensive. As a V1 crossed the English coast, it flew directly into this new, perfected kill zone. The moment it was detected, an American-made SCR-584 radar automatically locked onto the target. This was a revolutionary leap. The radar didn't just find the missile, it calculated its precise trajectory and fed that firing solution directly to the guns, all in real time. There was no more guesswork, no more desperate manual calculations. The guns, now automatically aimed, fired their shells. But these were shells equipped with the VT fuse. Each fuse contained a miniature radio transmitter built with ruggedized tubes developed by Sylvania and Western Electric. As the shell screamed towards its target, it broadcast a continuous radio signal. When those signals reflected off the V1, the fuse's internal circuit sensed its proximity. A thyrotron switch triggered the detonator, and the shell exploded, sending a cone of steel fragments ripping through the V1's hull. This was no longer a 1 in 10,000 lottery, it was a technological certainty. This brings us to the final extraordinary week of August 1944. The Allied system, the coastal gun belt, the SCR-584 radar, and the VT Fuze was now fully operational and working in perfect, deadly concert. This was the narrative's climax. On one single, remarkable day during that final week, the impossible technology achieved its peak. The coastal guns, firing their thinking shells, destroyed 82% of all incoming V1s. This was the number that had crumpled on the desks of German technical officers. It was the statistic that shattered their confidence and defied their science. A kill rate that German engineers, just weeks before, had confidently declared to be physically impossible, was now a battlefield reality. The V1, Hitler's unstoppable terror weapon, had been decisively defeated. We now cut back to the German headquarters, where the 82% report has created a full-blown crisis. Oberst Wachtel's first instinct is to suspect sabotage. This cannot be an Allied capability. It must be a failure in their own ranks. He orders emergency inspections of the V1s. Test firings are immediately conducted over German territory. The results only deepen the mystery. The missiles perform perfectly. The problem, it seems, only manifests when the V1s are flying against British defenses. German experts are forced to conclude the British have developed some revolutionary new anti-aircraft system, but they have no idea what it is. Without a single captured example, they are completely in the dark. In desperation, Wachtel and his command try every tactic they can imagine. They launch the V1s at different altitudes. They fire them in larger, overwhelming salvos. They exploit bad weather and shift to night launches, hoping to blind the British gunners. Nothing works. The kill rate remains devastating. Their scientific superiority has vanished, replaced by a terrifying and invisible technological wall they simply cannot breach. This is the true reveal. This is the Coca-Cola moment of the V1 campaign. Because the real secret, the one that truly defeated the German high command, wasn't just the idea of the proximity fuse. It was America's ability to mass produce it. Remember, German scientists had concluded this technology was impossible to build. Yet by August 1944, American factories that had been making radios and refrigerators just a few years earlier, were churning out 40,000 proximity fuses every single day. The scale of this industrial mismatch is staggering. Over the course of the war, the United States would produce 22 million of these fuses. The program cost over $1 billion in 1940s money, an astronomical sum. But through the power of the American assembly line, the cost of this impossible technology plummeted. A single fuse that cost $732 to produce in 1942 was rolling off the line for just $18 by 1945. This is the how that shatters the German myth. It wasn't magic. It was the overwhelming, casual, and terrifying abundance of American industrial might. While Germany was painstakingly handcrafting its wonder weapons in limited numbers, America was mass-producing a better solution on a scale the German mind and their entire economy couldn't even begin to comprehend. This contrast reveals the absolute moral and industrial gulf between the two systems. In America, the Crosley Corporation, a company that before the war had manufactured radios and refrigerators, voluntarily retooled its assembly lines. It employed 10,000 workers who, at their peak, were producing 16,000 proximity fuses every single day. Meanwhile, Sylvania Electric, cleverly adapting its designs from commercial hearing aids, produced an astonishing 400,000 of the tiny, ruggedized vacuum tubes daily. Now look at the other side of the equation. Germany's wonder weapons were not the product of a healthy, mobilized industry. The V1s were painstakingly built in limited numbers, and this production was fueled by unimaginable human suffering. Tens of thousands of concentration camp prisoners were worked to death in hellish underground factories like Mittelwerk-Dora, dying from starvation and exhaustion to build the very vengeance weapons that were being effortlessly destroyed by $18 fuses. This is the moral and industrial heart of the story. While American workers, many of them women, voluntarily worked overtime for premium wages, not even knowing the top-secret device they were making, Germany's totalitarian system had to consume its own people to build its weapons. It was industrial democracy versus totalitarian engineering, and the assembly line, run by free people, was decisively winning. It's difficult to overstate this industrial gap, so let's put it in the starkest terms possible. Germany, using forced labor and draining its precious resources, managed to produce approximately 25,000 V1 missiles throughout the entire war. America's monthly production of proximity fuses exceeded that number. Think about that. The U.S. was producing more of its impossible $18 solution in a single month than Germany could produce of its wonder weapon during the entire war. It wasn't just a technological gap, it was an industrial annihilation. The secrecy was nearly perfect. Throughout the entire V1 campaign, despite thousands of shells being fired, not a single intact proximity fuse fell into German hands. But the most remarkable and telling failure, the final twist, came months later during the Battle of the Bulge. In the chaos of their massive winter offensive, German forces overran and captured an American ammunition dump. Inside, they found stockpiles of artillery shells equipped with the top-secret proximity fuses. The secret was right there, sitting in their hands. They had the physical evidence, the impossible technology, and they never recognized what they had. Why? Because their own scientific assumption that such devices were impossible blinded them to the reality in front of them. They looked at the most advanced artillery shell in the world and saw nothing special. Their minds were so locked into their own dogma that they couldn't conceive of what they were holding. This was more than an intelligence failure. It was a psychological one. The Germans were already defeated by their own scientific arrogance, long before they were shown the fuse after the war. By September 1944, Hitler's V1 offensive against Britain was effectively neutralized. The final numbers tell the story. Of the 9,521 V1s launched from ground sites against England, only 2,515 ever reached the London target area. While the 6,184 civilians killed and 17,981 injured represented a profound and terrible tragedy, this was only a fraction of the devastation Germany had intended to inflict. This was the reward for the Allies' technological gamble, a satisfying and quantitative resolution to the problem. General Frederick Pyle, the commander of the entire anti-aircraft command, later made a stark calculation. He concluded that without the proximity fuse, the V1 casualties would have been 4 to 5 times higher. Long before this ingenious device would go on to help blaze the trail to Japan by protecting the U.S. fleet in the Pacific, its first and most crucial victory was won in the skies over the English Channel. The proximity fuse had, quite simply, saved London. After Germany's surrender in 1945, the final, humiliating chapter of the V1 story was written. Allied officers began interrogating the Third Reich's top weapons scientists and commanders. What they found was not guarded secrecy, but complete and total ignorance about the proximity fuse. Oberst Max Fachtel, the man who had commanded the entire V1 offensive, told Allied officers they had suspected the British had developed improved radar or perhaps faster-setting conventional fuses, but they never imagined the Allies were using self-thinking shells. This was the return with the elixir, only in reverse. The Germans were now forced to confront the magic that had defeated them. When Allied interrogators finally presented the captured American VT fuses to the German scientists, their reaction was not just surprise, it was profound disbelief. They simply could not comprehend how the miniature vacuum tubes could survive the massive acceleration of being fired from a gun. They examined the $18 device, a marvel of mass production they had deemed impossible, and were forced to admit a devastating conclusion. They estimated they were 10 years behind American technology. The war had been lost, not just on the battlefield, but in the laboratory and on the assembly line. That remarkable day in late August 1944, when 82% of V1s were shot from the sky, didn't just save a city, it changed the nature of warfare forever. This is the final lesson. The proximity fuse proved that in modern industrial war, mass-producing good technology matters far more than crafting a few perfect wonder weapons. Germany produced brilliant, complex, and exotic individual weapons. America, by contrast, focused on multiplicative technologies, devices like the fuse that made every existing weapon 5 to 10 times more effective. It produced these effective weapons by the millions. The Germans, who truly believed their V1 represented the pinnacle of weapons technology, had to face a devastating truth. They hadn't been defeated by superior strategy or courage alone. They had been defeated by an industrial capacity they couldn't match and an electronics industry they hadn't imagined possible. They had lost not to warriors, but to assembly lines. It was the ultimate triumph of industrial democracy over totalitarian engineering. In the end, America's greatest victory wasn't won by generals or physicists, but by millions of ordinary workers who never even knew the secret. We end not on the battlefield, but in the factories. At Sylvania's facility in Ipswich, over 5,000 women worked grueling 12-hour shifts, day in and day out, producing specialized electronic components. Because of the project's extreme compartmentalization, they had no idea what they were truly making. They only knew it was important. It was only after the war, when the proximity fuse was finally declassified, that these women discovered the truth. They learned that the tiny, delicate parts they had mass-produced by the millions, the parts German science deemed impossible, had saved London from Hitler's terror weapon. They were the unwitting saviors, the human face of an industrial might that had changed the world forever.